Academically through science, it really all began when I was in third grade, and I saw a picture, the Hubble Deep Field image, which, if you're not familiar with, it's a really famous astronomy picture, in which every speck of light that you see is a galaxy. And, at the ripe age of, I don't know, 7 or 8, I just thought that was incredible. And throughout my academic career, I kept seeing this picture pop up. And it just felt like an affirmation that I was, destined to sort of study the space sciences. And it just really continued to inspire me. So, long story short, I go to WashU. I'm thinking of studying neuroscience because that's what my grandparents study, and it always really interested me. But I wanted to be involved with the space sciences in some capacity. It was always my dream to work for NASA. And I ended up getting into a class because I didn't get into a neuroscience one. It was just sort of a first come, first serve freshman course. And the class I ended up taking was about how to find a habitable planet. So what makes Earth ripe for sustaining life? How can we find other planets like that in our solar system and beyond? And I was just enthralled and so passionate about this course. The professor was awesome, and she ended up becoming my major advisor, and I completely shifted gears from neuroscience and started to study cosmochemistry and geochemistry in the Earth and Planetary Science department. And throughout my time in undergrad, I had the privilege to do my own research, and I was studying meteorites. So I was looking at the potassium isotope composition, which is a strange way of identifying early formation histories of meteorites and sort of using that as a proxy to understand the formation of our solar system and our planet. So I tell people, I got to crush up space rocks for science, and that was sort of in a nutshell what I was doing. And throughout that, I more and more sort of realized that I had a passion for teaching, specifically within Earth and Planetary Sciences, because it can be a really daunting field to break into. I think it's an excellent time to, pursue a career, not only in STEM, but specifically in Earth and Planetary Sciences, because of the, just transformation of the space program, where NASA and lots of other research endeavors are at technologically. We have the means to study our solar system, our planet, and beyond like never before. And it can be really discouraging when you take really challenging classes. Speaking for myself, freshman year of college was really challenging. And I question, am I making the right decision? Can I sort of continue on this path if things are already so tough? And I never let, sort of the difficulties I had course-wise, or, sort of juggling playing collegiate sports and school, I never let it stop me. I just kept plugging along. And what continued to inspire me about what I was studying was the goal of one day being able to teach it to others and sort of instill the same inspiration and motivation that my professors had done to me, and really welcome the new field of Earth and Planetary Scientists. So suffice it to say, I went to graduate school at the University of Chicago, where I continued doing cosmochemistry research, studying different aspects of our solar system. But instead of studying meteorites, I was studying stardust. So these little microscopic samples that are called pre-solar grains, because they predate our solar system. So they're sort of the byproducts of supernova, other massive star explosions. So they contain a lot of the key ingredients that our sun inherited and evidently used to produce the solar system. So it was a really fascinating research project. It was really challenging in a lot of ways because the instrument I was working with is one of a kind, and there's no manual when you're working with something that's a one-off. So it was a really steep learning curve, but it gave me a lot of confidence that, despite how challenging it was to learn, it took me about a year to gain full autonomy of using the instrument and being able to do things independently. But it was really rewarding to see sort of the fruits of my labor and being able to conduct my own research, and discover some pretty cool things, which is always fun and not always what science yields, but it's great when it does. And so I finished up my master's, and now I am a guest lecturer at several small schools around Chicago, where I'm teaching astronomy, earth science, mineralogy. So really getting to teach exactly what I was hoping to when this whole journey began back in college. So it's been really fulfilling. And what's funny is the impact that Hubble image had on me. I make a point to show on the first day of class in my astronomy class and kind of see everybody's reactions when I tell them what the significance of that image is. And then on the last day of class, I'll show that image again, and they'll have a sort of newfound appreciation and understanding of what that image signifies and means.
So I was wondering like how you would use like computer tools to analyze the rocks and like how you were cutting up rocks and everything. Like did you use like any specific programs or software or something to analyze rocks in your lab or classroom?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the most part, the software that we use to analyze the compositions of our samples. So we have our own software that basically shows us a spectrum, because we're using different wavelengths to determine composition, and we get a bunch of counts as we're measuring our sample. And as those counts come in, it's our job to sort of parse through the data and make sense of the signal we're seeing. So I didn't use a specific computer program, but basically using the data that our instrument picks up on. And then Excel is a really handy software. It's not anything like Python or Java, but Excel is very user-friendly and does the job just as well in keeping everything organized, being able to bin certain values. So I would say it's sort of a tandem of what our instruments computers do, and then Excel. And in general, I would encourage everybody to get proficient in Excel, because no matter what sort of field you go into, there are so many tricks and ways to utilize it that makes simple calculations 100 times easier. I know of other folks who use different modeling programs to try and replicate certain values, which is a whole nother sort of iteration of Earth and planetary sciences.
But I also really liked how you talked a little bit about like maybe being like a little nervous or having some doubts, being like working with the one of a kind technology and also like changing from neuro to like astronomy and like things like that. Because it's like when looking at what you do now in your research, it seems like everything was just like so great, like you're so amazing. And at least for me, I'm entering like a rigorous program next year, and I know I'm gonna find like a lot of challenges. And I just want to know like how you go about overcoming that, or were you just so fascinated by the research that it just like it didn't really wasn't too significant for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think having a passion, a vested interest in what you're doing is really important, because there are so many things, societally that are contributing to people's career paths. I think there's a big emphasis on, doing something that has a really impressive title. And I think that if that is what motivates you and really pushes you, awesome. But at a certain point, if your heart isn't in something, it's going to get challenging to do, and that can be scary. And I was at sort of the same realization when I switched from neuro to sort of the space sciences, because I couldn't visualize myself going to medical school. I mean, I'm kind of skeeved out by blood, so I should have known that from the start. There was this, sort of internal voice that felt like it was pushing me to do something I was genuinely interested in. And the moments that were really tough, and, I sort of questioned whether I could really excel in this field, if I was smart enough. You always ask yourself these sorts of questions, especially when, you're surrounded by a really wide variety of skills and talents, and you sort of get in this trap of comparing yourself, which is really easy to do. But one of the things that really benefited me throughout college was, so I played softball, and my coach had this, she would have us do mental conditioning, because not only is it important to be physically conditioned and in shape and ready to go, but mentally you have to be there as well. So we would have assignments once a week, and some of my teammates, didn't take it seriously, but I really did, and tried to embody the fact that, you know, nothing defines you singularly. Whatever you're studying, what your GPA is, what you're doing outside of school or outside of the field, you are the sum of all those parts. And for me, when I was struggling academically, my freshman year of college, that was really new to me, because school had always really come easily. I didn't have to work extremely hard. I still did, but it didn't feel as uphill of a battle as some of those freshman courses did. So I really had to lean into the fact that, I'm not failing. These aren't failures. Everything is really a teachable moment. So when times got tough, I just tried to, reframe my thinking, and seeing, okay, how can I learn from this? How can I get better, and use that as motivation itself?
You were talking about how when you were having difficulty at first studying what you like, that it took a lot of time to get used to the technology. And I just want to know what you were studying with that at the time, and if you were like able to study and like synthesize your research and also use that technology at the same time, and like what was it? Like what was the device?
Yeah, good question. So the instrument I was working on, the acronym is CHILI. It's the Chicago Instrument for Laser Ionization. And so what we were doing is basically we utilized 6 tunable lasers. They're class 4, so they're very dangerous. I felt like I was, mad scientist in a sci-fi movie, because you stuck your hand in, you do get burned, and you learn that the hard way when you're sort of learning how to tune things and work this big optics table. So what we would do is each of those lasers could be tuned to a different wavelength. And those wavelengths are specific for certain ionization energies of different isotopes. So a different element can have several different isotopes, as I'm sure you've probably learned in chemistry, and if not, you will. And that can tell us a lot more about the processes that occurred for that isotope to be in a specific sample. So this process called nucleosynthesis, which is what happens in the births and deaths of stars, is responsible for producing all of the naturally occurring elements on our periodic table. So what we were doing was studying different isotope compositions. I was specifically looking at molybdenum, ruthenium, and barium, because those three elements, they're really diagnostic in telling us certain chemical processes that happened in these environments. So I would put my teeny tiny stardust sample in, find it using our scanning electron microscope, which is housed on the instrument itself. So you can move around the stage just like you would with a normal microscope. And once you find the sample, and I was specifically looking at pre-solar graphite. So these little carbon grains that have internal inclusions that are made of all sorts of different things. So those little inclusions inside were what I was really hoping to target. I didn't know if they were in there. So I was sort of shooting in the dark. And then once we did find them, how much of our molybdenum, ruthenium, and barium did they have? That was another big question. So while I was learning how to use the machine my first year of grad school, I was really trying to determine what I wanted to study specifically for when I did have, the ability to kind of do things on my own. And I put a lot of pressure on myself looking back on it, because I felt really compelled to hit the ground running, know what I want to do. And it doesn't always work out that way. You have to do something that feels right to you. And in reading as much as I possibly could about, different advancements in cosmochemistry, what our group was doing, I sort of stumbled upon this little niche of graphite grains that had really been sort of passed by in our cosmochemistry community. With advancements back in the 90s, when people were really studying graphite grains, the technology just wasn't there. And now that we have this machine, I thought, well, it's the perfect time to sort of circle back and study these samples. So while I was learning to use the instrument, I was also, really diving into reading, brushing up, and really studying, what the field, what sort of narrative is currently being told with these grains, and where can we go from here?
You talked about how you got into what piqued your interest in environmental science, but how did you decide that you wanted to teach instead of doing something else like research?
I really enjoyed research. Throughout undergrad, it was really exciting to get to work with space rocks. I think that's just really neat. And then the more I got into it, I realized that the next sort of path would be graduate school. And so I was enrolled in the PhD program. And really up until about a year and a half into graduate school, I was still intent on staying and earning my PhD. But it just sort of occurred to me when I was doing research, where my passions truly lied. And compared to my peers, I felt so much more motivated getting to teach. So as a graduate student, you wear a lot of different hats. You still attend classes, you're doing research, and you're also sort of required to be a teaching assistant for a lot of undergraduate classes. And I had the opportunity to actually teach. So the course I was a TA in was flipped. So all of the teaching assistants were responsible for lecturing. So in teaching that class, it really solidified how much I love teaching, connecting with students, getting them excited about what they're learning about, and being a sounding board for students who are maybe undecided about what path to take and getting to be, an inspiration, not only, not to say that they go into the field that I did, but just to continue doing what gets them excited, where they feel most comfortable, where they can feel a sense of community in what they're learning. It was at this moment that I was sort of perusing career opportunities, and I kind of took a leap of faith of just earning my master's and pursuing teaching full time. And I don't have any regrets. It feels right. I felt like the research I was doing was really exciting, but it was really consuming. I had a really poor work-life balance. I felt like my advisors didn't share the same values that I did, and that was challenging. So I had to really do what felt right to me. And some of the peers I had, questioned why I wouldn't want to continue and earn my PhD, but it felt like a really unpredictable timeline. And I just felt ready to teach and excited, and I didn't want to pass up on some of the opportunities that were out there. I think it was what was best for me.
Hello. First of all, thank you so much for speaking with us. I learned like so much, and it was like your
Oh.
story of, especially how you got interested, was very, very interesting and inspiring. So my specific question was, being like a woman in STEM, you've obviously like probably dealt with your fair share of challenges. So what are some specific instances where you felt like you maybe like faced discrimination, or maybe were put at like a disadvantage being a woman in STEM, maybe like in your research or even in your classes? And then, considering your experiences and all your challenges and career turns, what are some advice that you think would have been helpful for you to have starting your career? Because a lot of us have like just began to start our careers.
Yeah. So I think to answer your first question, our department was really small. We sort of housed a few different majors. There was environmental science, geology, geophysics, and geochemistry. And I was the only geochemistry major in the school, which it was really, really tough, very isolating, because it felt like I didn't have anyone to sort of commiserate with, study with. It felt really isolating. I would say that going into graduate school, I felt almost as though it's tough when you come from, a really small department, and now you're immersed in this big department, and everybody is equally as smart and has so many credentials, and it can feel like, you have imposter syndrome. For me, my peers and sort of the work that they had done prior, it felt like I wasn't totally qualified, which was crazy because you're there for a reason. You were accepted, you having this self-doubt is so natural. And I felt like because I, played sports, that they sort of viewed me as, oh, well, maybe she's not as smart because she played sports in college. And, that wasn't the reason I got into the schools I did. It felt like I wasn't quite the same as my peers in graduate school because I didn't come from a really big department. I hadn't had a massive connections like some of the other students did. And, being one of the only girls, it didn't feel like I was, discriminated against because I was a woman, but it's tough when you don't have other girls to sort of, surround yourself with. So I felt, very supported at WashU and in that department because there were a lot of other women. And despite being the only one in my major, I still had a sense of community with my professors, which I'm so fortunate for. So any advice I would give is to just really focus and try to be as in touch with yourself as possible. If something doesn't feel right to you, you have to look out for yourself more than anybody. And I think for a long time, I was really concerned about how other people would perceive me, how my advisors viewed me, where I stood, what my family would think of my choices and how I was doing in school and within research. And when it comes down to it, you are your own person. You have this autonomy to do what you want to do and make yourself proud. And I think that that's something that I wish I had been told, is that you can give yourself grace and sort of understanding and don't have to let other people's opinions skew your view of yourself.
And second of all, I wanted to ask about the role as and importance of like mentorships in like and role models in your scientific career. And if you had any advice or tips on like how to build and find and create these kinds of mentorships and support systems around you.
I think the first thing, which took me a while to get used to, is being okay asking for help. Really putting yourself out there, being honest, because people appreciate other people who are genuine. And if you go about your homework or your school and think like, oh, this all makes sense, but in reality, it doesn't, you're only hurting yourself, and it doesn't hurt to ask. So I really had to push myself and ask for help, go to office hours. And in doing so, I really developed a lot of really good connections with my professors, because in the midst of talking about, assignment stuff, you get to know them. And being vulnerable, asking a question that you may think sounds silly, not only sort of shows your professors and your peers that, you're just putting yourself out there, you're just doing what's right for you. Things have a way of sort of working out. And in the process, developed, some really great relationships with them. In the process of going through college, you sort of realize the type of person you are and the type of people you like to surround yourself with. So it's also important to check in with yourself, see if these people feel right to be hanging out around, even if they're classmates. Sometimes personalities don't mix well. So it's just as important to put yourself out there, but also do what's right and feels right for you.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you again for coming to speak with all of us. And my question really was centered on how you talked about your change from neuroscience. And I was really wondering, did you face any doubts, sort of thinking like, oh, is this the right change? And if you did, how did you sort of combat those misgivings or doubts, just thinking, is this a good idea for me? So how did you sort of face that?
I definitely did. I mean, it was really tough at first because, had to tell my parents, hey, I'm changing majors. And when I told them I was thinking of geochemistry, their first thought was, what is that? How can you possibly get a job in that? And, asking all these natural questions that parents are going to ask. I just, really wanted to be honest with myself, and I was so excited to shift gears and pursue geochemistry that even when things felt exceedingly difficult, or did I make the right decision, in the midst of everything, I still felt this spark to study what I was doing, especially with the goal of working for NASA. A lot of my samples in graduate school came from NASA, and I've gotten to participate in a lot of things. So although I'm not a NASA employee, I've come pretty close. I just had this motivation and kept doing things that fueled that. And if something, didn't, you have to take classes that don't pique your interest in college. It's just part of the requirements. But I kept this dream of one day working for NASA, studying space sciences, really being immersed in the field. That's what really kept me going. And there's trying times, and sometimes your passion for things, your motivation gets tested. And I think you just have to really be honest with yourself, really assess, okay, why am I doing this? My softball coach would always sort of force us to answer and ask ourselves, what is your why? And if at a point you can't answer that, you have to maybe do some self-reflection and get back to what that why is, why you're studying something. And if it feels like you're doing it more for somebody else than yourself, then it's okay to put yourself first. And it has worked out in the long run. There are moments that you get tested, but that's just part of perseverance and really doing something to make yourself proud.